I'm Rina Raphael. I'm an expert in bullshit in the wellness industry, which I'll explain a little bit more about. I am a member of the media, a profession that 42% of Americans have very low or low standards. We are one of the least and probably at the bottom of one of the 10 top civic institutions. We're not really trusted at all, and we've been hurt so much that, in fact, the average time spent on news websites is now down to just 1 minute and 30 seconds. That's down from 2.5 minutes in 2014. In fact, we just hit a new milestone. For the third year in a row, more Americans, 36%, have no confidence at all in the media, and that's followed by people who feel that they have not very much confidence in media at 33%. But there's so many other perks of being a journalist. As you can see, there's so much to be gained from being the type of person who holds people and companies, institutions accountable. And even if we don't always have the backing of the public, those closest to us support our work and are so happy with what we're doing. So very excited and very happy to be a journalist. Now, there's a lot of different people to blame for what's happened to journalism. A lot of people like to say that social media platforms killed journalism by scooping up all the advertising money and not sharing it. Some blame Trump, who every other day calls us the enemy of the people. Some blame hedge funds, which, like vultures, really sort of preyed on newspaper outlets that were struggling, content marketing, you name it. But there seems to be one person that the media doesn't blame: themselves. And today I'm here to talk about the media's role in specifically health misinformation and how they're losing the public's trust. Now, one of the top complaints I get from people is how much they can't stand that every day there's some other study finds story. And probably nothing better illustrates this than the war on eggs. One day eggs is good for you, the next day it's bad for you, one day it's good for your heart health, maybe it's not. It drives people absolutely crazy. And that's because there are just so many studies being done about eggs. And unfortunately, journalists, and especially editors, are more than happy to print 1,000 different stories on things like eggs. And it's not just eggs. It could be red wine, it could be red meat, you name it, there are tons of studies about it. And this is not new information. I'm sure everyone knows all this. And in fact, about a decade ago, there was a study done in which 450 press releases from the top leading universities, medical and health institutions were surveyed and studied. And they found that 40% of them exaggerated health advice, 33% of them overemphasized causal connection. And then because of that, journalists who oftentimes just regurgitate a press release or they just look at the abstract, 81% of that information is then fed to the public. So this is not news, okay? This has been going on for a long time. Journalists, and especially editors, look at a story or a study and they say, is this interesting? Is it a little sensational? Will it get people talking? Even better, is it controversial? And in fact, one study came out last week that I thought really made me laugh, because for years we've been told that sitting is killing us, that sitting is as bad as smoking cigarettes, that you're going to die young from it. And then we were told last week, actually, standing is also bad for you. Which leads me to believe, as I've always believed, that the best thing we can do is work lying down in bed as nature intended. But there's another type of study that you're seeing a lot these days. This is a study that made, I didn't make this gorgeous, beautiful AI art. I know, I can't take credit for this. But last year there was a story about wasabi. And it got into a whole bunch of press outlets like CBS News and ABC about how wasabi, yes, that condiment that you always wish was guacamole, had brain-boosting powers and was going to help senior citizens with their memory and was really, really going to transform cognitive health. Now, what was missing often in these stories was the fact that it was in a very low quality journal, that's where it was published, that it was based on kind of dubious research methods, and oh, it was funded and produced by the biggest manufacturer of wasabi, literally Big Wasabi. That was definitely relevant information to pass on to the reader, but it wasn't, and mainly, I think, because a lot of writers and reporters just read the press release. But this is important because what's happening is beyond the academic conveyor belt and paper mills. We all know about publish or perish. We all know that our research institutions and our universities are publishing way too much stuff, and a lot of it isn't informational or even that novel. But there's something different going on now, and it tends to stories like these. And that has to do with the wellness industry. The wellness industry is huge, and if you were here last year, I gave a talk about what the wellness industry actually is. It's dozens of different subsectors. You can't really define it. That's by design. That means we can keep shoving more and more dubious sectors underneath its umbrella. But basically, it is such a huge, huge, huge industry. And this industry, different companies understand that everyone right now is looking for health and wellness. In fact, Nielsen IQ said that wellness is the single most powerful consumer force these days. Every company right now is trying to be a wellness company. I get pitches from auto manufacturers who say that they're now a wellness company because they're going to put aromatherapy filters in cars. Showerhead companies are now wellness companies. Beauty companies are wellness companies. And you know what they know? They know that they can get a lot of press attention if they use some sort of weird findings or some poll and make it sound really awfully scientific, send it off into a press release, and there you go. Last year, I wrote a story for the New York Times about how fake science and scientific jargon really misleads consumers. If something has academic language or it sounds like Bill Nye, we're sold. We definitely want to believe all of it, which is why if you go to a Whole Foods, you'll see a ton of bottles saying gut health and research-backed and medical grade and evidence-based. This really, really works on the consumer. But it also works on journalists. And I'm going to explain why, because there's a couple of different trends going on within the media industry. This is all a big problem because when journalists don't know their stuff or they don't know enough about science and health, they're putting all this crap out into the ether, and people believe it because we'll believe anything if it's in a headline. So these are some headlines from the New York Times. And they kind of seem like they got your hippie aunt drunk at dinner and she just started asking the questions she's always had. Stuff about apple cider vinegar and oil pulling, basically all the stuff that was kind of maybe fringe, alternative health, or in little pockets of TikTok are now all over our top media institutions. And some of them even flirt with pseudoscience. Look at this headline. Do you really need sunscreen every day? Even just asking that question, it gives a little bit of legitimacy to these ideas. And a lot of this has to do with what's going on with media. If you notice these days, a lot of newspapers suddenly have wellness sections. Why would you need a wellness section if you already have a health and medical desk? What's the difference? Why is this? Why does everything from the LA Times, Washington Post, in fact, even business publications like Fortune and Forbes have their own wellness section? Well, what does it mean? Wellness, more or less, in my opinion, is a little more forgiving of pseudoscience, of alternative health. It's not taken as seriously. It's not held to the same standards as a health and medical desk. It's a little bit more fun, right? That's what we're seeing. More and more of these publications are now building wellness desks. And the next time you read a story and you're like, what is this? I dare you to go and look what section it's in. A lot of this has to do with media. Unfortunately, ad revenue has really gone downhill, and a lot of these places need money. And they're not going to get it from advertisers anymore. That's over. But there's a new place to get money. The subscriber. She'll give you her money, but there's a problem here. When you're moving from advertising to subscriber, that means you have a new boss, and that's the subscriber. I worked in many different outlets from NBC News to CBS. It's very rare that an advertiser will call you and say, I don't like the coverage, or take this down, or I don't want to be associated with this. Save for a national tragedy, they kind of leave you alone. They're fine with their advertisements there. It's different with a subscriber-based outlet. What that means is that you have to make sure that the customer is happy. Back in my day, when I started out 20 years ago, when it was advertiser-based, we basically fed our vegetables to the reader because we were like, this is what they should know. But it's different now, because now there's a subscriber, and you want to make sure that subscriber is happy. Here are some headlines from the New York Times, and it's kind of shocking this is in the New York Times. Energy healing, crystals, hotels that promise high-tech healing. I assure you they do not. But this is what their subscriber likes, and their subscriber pays. And more you're seeing this, oftentimes in a wellness section, or sometimes in the lifestyle section. Or they're doing all kinds of stuff that equate health with commerce or with a certain type of lifestyle. It's about wearing the right stuff, having the right gear, having all the right tech. Unfortunately, wellness has become too much of a lifestyle. It's become more of a status symbol than anything else. In fact, we made water bottles a status symbol. That's how bad it's gotten. That's how sad it's gotten. In my day, it used to be sneakers or something of the sort, but these are literally just water bottles. Wellness is treated like fashion. It's not taken seriously. I like to always remind people, hey, remember 10 years ago, it was all about green juice, then it was bone broth, then it was kombucha, then it was functional elixirs, then it was sea moss smoothies. It just keeps going and going and going. Honestly, kind of like fad diets. That's how it is actually such a lucrative industry. It just keeps trying new and different things, and it's just hoping you don't realize they keep promising you stuff and it doesn't work. And that's how it's being treated by media outlets as well. It's not being taken seriously. I remember I once went to the Goop conference, and I asked the woman there, I said, you know she's full of shit, right? I mean, like, nothing here. This is all a joke. And they said, oh, actually, we know. We know that she's full of shit. But isn't it fun? Isn't it fun to treat health like this? That's how people are treating health now, like it's entertainment. Another way that a lot of publications make money is by blending editorial with commerce. It's why oftentimes you see shopping guides, like here are the 10 best, brain supplements, or gift guides, or oftentimes product reviews. These are really easy to pump out. They cost basically no money. Nobody cares if you have expertise or not. And a lot of times they keep shoving health advice under this. Or they do, I tried it. You'll see this everywhere from CNBC to Fortune, any of the top publications, where basically someone says, I tried this protocol and it worked for me, hence it'll work for you. Anecdotal evidence. Again, super cheap to do. These are everywhere now. But I want to ask, could you imagine this ever being done for a pharmaceutical? No. Why does wellness be treated like this? Why does wellness basically get free reign to do whatever it wants? Because it's treated like fashion. It's not taken seriously. The other thing is, who's writing these stories and who are the editors? More and more, the people who are running a lot of these wellness desks or writing these stories are people who came from the fashion industry or celebrity coverage, or they used to do business reporting. These are people who are not necessarily versed in basic scientific principles or even know anything about the subject or the field. This is oftentimes who's writing some of our stories, and they just don't know enough as someone who's been a health reporter. And a lot of this is happening because health and wellness are some of the most lucrative sections now of newspapers and outlets. So every reporter is dying to come join this field. So they may not know anything about correlation versus causation. They may not know which relevant experts to reach out to. If they're doing a story, maybe they're reaching out to a dermatologist instead of a toxicologist. These are the people writing our stories because they know that wellness is the big, hot thing to be a part of. I can't tell you how many fashion journalists I know now who now write health stories. Because you know what? No one talks about Fashion Week anymore. They talk about Gwyneth Paltrow. They talk about whatever health protocol Kim Kardashian is doing. Even go look at any celebrity interview these days. They don't ask, like, who do you wear? What designers do you love? They ask questions like, what's your morning routine? What's your health routine? What supplements do you take? And so everyone is rushing over to wellness because it's the hot new sector. They definitely don't know that a lot of studies that are done in mice are not necessarily applicable to humans. I once actually had a conversation with a fellow health journalist who came over from the celebrity world, and I tried to explain this to her, and her response was, well, I mean, rats also have eyes and lungs and feet, so I just don't think it's that big of a deal. But they don't know enough about science. I actually can understand this. If you have no science background and you're suddenly writing about health because it's fashion, why would you know this? Here's a perfect example of how this comes into play. Every year, there's something called the Dirty Dozen. And this is the Environmental Working Group's list of produce you should avoid or not avoid. And the Environmental Working Group is an advocacy and lobbying group that's mostly funded by the organic industry. Now, they come out with these press releases every year about all the evil produce that's coming out to get you and give you cancer with pesticide residue. And the media loves this because it always does well. I've been in these newsrooms. Every year they say people love this, but also they fight over it. It's so great, it's controversial. Fine. But what they fail to add in these stories oftentimes is, for example, in 2019, when nectarines made the list, an average American adult could eat 8,000 nectarines in a day, and they still wouldn't meet the threshold for pesticide residue. But to know that, you'd have to know the difference between relative and absolute risk. And a lot of these journalists don't know that. They don't even know to ask that question. And this is a big problem because oftentimes they're writing about a lot of stories that make people panic and makes people worry about how their beauty cabinet and shampoo is plotting against them. They are writing about things that they have no knowledge about, and they're not reaching out to the right people. Now, sometimes and oftentimes, they do speak to the right experts and they do get the right information. They get all the facts. The problem? It's in the second half of the story, and most people only read the headline. Remember how earlier I was talking about that the average American now spends 1 minute and 30 seconds reading the news? It's mostly spent just scanning headlines. So when they see headlines that are terrifying them about their produce, their shampoo, Snickers bars, Kellogg's Fruit Loops, whatever it is, that's all they see. This is why it is so dangerous when the New York Times has a headline like, "Do you really need sunscreen?" This isn't good because nobody is actually reading the story. So I want to get back to why we're seeing stories like this in some of our most esteemed publications. We have publications like the Washington Post and Newsweek that are now basically vouching for pseudoscience. Now, there is one other reason why journalists could be confused. They have reason to. Because some of our top institutions are also vouching for pseudoscience in their complementary and integrative medicine wings. What do I say when the Mayo Clinic boasts that it does 1,400 acupuncture appointments a year? What do I say, for example, to an editor who I'm trying to explain why energy healing isn't necessarily evidence-based? They say, but the Cleveland Clinic vouches for it. What am I supposed to say to my editor? These are actual conversations I've had with editors, and I cannot fight back because then they tell me, you know more than the Cleveland Clinic? What about the World Health Organization? Gosh, the media is just asking everyone to listen to the World Health Organization about vaccines and important health information. But now the World Health Organization also includes traditional Chinese medicine, including things like liver qi stagnation, which is liver damage from emotional disharmony. Or how about diarrhea disorder, which is frequent bowel movements explained by wind, cold, dampness, fire, or heat factors. It's really, really hard for me to do my job when I can't rely on the institutions that should be there with me, vouching for evidence-based medicine. oftentimes what you'll see in stories is that they interview a physician, a scientist, a medical expert, alongside a naturopath, a holistic healer, an alternative medicine practitioner. It's oftentimes the media's way of saying that we're neutral, both sides, we're fair. It's really, really unfortunate that this is happening. And one of the reasons I've also found is that a lot of places don't, again, want to upset their subscriber who believes in some of this stuff and they want to hear both sides. But also I've been told by certain publications that I'm not even allowed to use the term alternative medicine. That's othering other types of knowing, or indigenous ways of knowledge, or I can't put down certain types of alternative remedies because it may be something that minorities depend on. This is actually happening at some of our top publications. And it's, I think, really, really dangerous for the rest of the American public that can't necessarily then rely on the media to give them the information that they need or explain to them how to even understand the science in medicine. Of course, journalists aren't happy with media either. A lot of us are burnt out because we're overworked and there isn't a ton of money in it anymore. And there's something else that the media doesn't like to talk about, which is that because it's no longer, well, it never was lucrative, but because it's really not lucrative anymore, and because it's gotten so much harder, and because everyone's being forced to churn out more and more stories, we're losing some of our best journalists. They're leaving us in droves. So those really awesome science and health journalists that we used to have, they're done. They're going to go work for a university, maybe they're going to go work in tech, they're going to go work for a pharmaceutical. They're over it. They're done. And we're left with more and more former fashion journalists. This is what's happening in media across the board. And it's really sad because there is an opportunity here, because although people don't really love the media anymore, we're still more trusted than social media platforms, so we have that going for us. So there is an opportunity, right? And it is our duty. But then, at the same time, we're all part of the same ecosystem. So what I have to say maybe is the same as what you would say a TikTok creator might say. Maybe they're having the same impact. I wrote a story 2 years ago about how TikTok creators were fighting against misinformation, specifically within health and medicine. I featured people like Food Science Babe, who are really out there every day debunking all these things that are really warping our young people's minds. But there's something else that's going on that gives me a little bit of hope. In the last year, I think we're really seeing a lot more of these creators really want to do deep dives to really explain how people should understand science, longer stories, longer videos. We're seeing this on YouTube with people like Michelle Wong of Lab Muffin Beauty Science. We're seeing a lot more scientists and former journalists go on Substack, including Andrea Love, who's speaking at this conference as well. These are people who are really doing deep dives and doing a lot of the work that unfortunately the media isn't doing as well as they used to, for a number of the reasons that I listed here today. I myself have a Substack as well, where I go into all the stories that get declined by all the places that I work for, and are probably not going to hire me once they hear about this presentation. And I often get asked by people, okay, Rina, give me a publication I should subscribe to. What's the one place I definitely should trust? And I wouldn't say there's any one place that I wholly trust anymore. What I say is find journalists, content creators, knowledgeable people that you trust, that you think do a good job, and follow them and follow their work and go support them. But unfortunately, there's not one definite outlet that I think gets it right. And I actually think it's going to get worse. I don't think it's going to get better. I think we're headed towards a future where more and more institutions have less money and are giving themselves more and more over to their subscribers. So if you find someone you like, it could be someone on TikTok, it could be a Substacker, whoever it is, please be sure to support them, give them all your money, make sure to tell them that they shouldn't go to law school. And that's it. That's all from me. I'm Rina Raphael. You can find me on my Substack, Well-To-Do, and you can read my book, The Gospel of Wellness. And I'm around if anyone else wants to talk shit about the media industry.